for setting this all up. And it's 10 o'clock, so I figured we'll get started. And if anybody, joins in the middle, then, they're more than welcome. It is I never remember, it is day 319 of the war. And so I'd like to dedicate the learning that we do to the release of the hostages that are still alive, also to, dedicate to, helping, I guess, recover the hostages live or not yet, not alive any longer, that still remain, and to refuah for all of the wounded. Okay, so there is a very, very famous Gemara that says, and I should have actually titled it like this, that says that anybody who thinks that David HaMelech sinned is mistaken. And I think that Gemara is, I'm sorry, let me put these here for, I think that Gemara is misunderstood. And I think what that Gemara is trying to say is not the way we are taught. And the Gemara is actually the way that I prefer to learn the story. So Judy is not so happy, but I think hopefully by the end of the class, she'll be happier. I think actually what the Gemara does.
Were you here when there was a class?
There was a class on this subject.
We had a sign, and Elon was downstairs.
Oh no, I was not here when that happened. No, apparently there was a class about this years ago. That was not well. I don't know.
We were having a class about this subject, and something hung up, and Elon took it down.
Yeah, because they didn't like the speaker.
Okay. Well, I think actually what the Gemara does, if you understand it the way I hope to explain it, it actually censures David HaMelech more than the text itself. So what I want to do is look at the actual story in Shmuel Bet. Shmuel Bet, I should probably get a source sheet. Shmuel Bet Parak Yud Aleph, and take a look at the story of the sin that David commits with Bathsheba. And we are going to start with chapter 11, Parak Yud Aleph, but I just want to give you a little bit of background to what's going on in his life. David is king. He's been king for a while. He did amazing things. He captured Yerushalayim. He brought the Aron to Yerushalayim. He made it his capital. He fought wars. Things are peaceful. He really did some incredible, incredible things. He united the people. And what happens in chapter 10 in Parak Yud is it seems that he makes a misstep somehow. He sends messengers or representatives to pay a shiva call to the king of Ammon. King of Ammon died, and the crown prince is now the new king. And to pay a condolence call, David sends messengers or representatives to the new king, and the new king's advisors tell the king, these are not representatives here for a shiva call, they're really here to spy. And so the king humiliates the messengers. He shaves off half their beards. He rips their clothes in half. They're sent back half naked, half a beard. They're totally humiliated. And then, and this I think with recent events is not going to sound so shocking to us, then they panic and say, oh no, Israel's going to be really upset about what we did. We better preemptively attack them. So they start a war with us. And the reason that's important is because this whole story happens on the background of this war. There's a war that was started by King David. Now, all the commentaries want to know, what did he do wrong? He tried to do a nice thing. And I think the easiest way of explaining it is he blurs the lines between the personal and the professional. The reason he sends the messengers is because the king had done something for him years and years ago. And so he's kind of paying a kindness, but when you're the king, you can't really do that, right? When you're the leader of a country, you can't repay personal favors, especially when this is an enemy. So the background of this story is a war that was started because of King David's actions, whether they were well-intentioned or not. So chapter 11 starts out, Vayhi l'tshuvat hashana, as at the turning of the year. La'et seit hamalachim, vayishlach David et Yoav et avadav imo et kol Yisrael, vayashchitu et bnei Ammon. So it seems like, just like today, kind of there was a pause in the war. It was the winter, it was rainy. You don't want to fight in the mud and the rain, so they kind of wait. And now the year has turned, and it's time to start up the war again. So it does say malachim, which is messengers. When the messengers go out, David sends Yoav, who's his army general, with his army, and they destroy the people of Ammon, and they put a siege around the capital. And malachim here means, it could mean messengers. The commentaries say kings, that the kings are all going out to fight their wars again. And David sends Yoav to go continue this war, and the war is ongoing. They're winning. There's a siege on the capital of Ammon. And then we find out in Pasuk Bet, I'm sorry, at the end of Pasuk Aleph, but David Yoshev Yerushalayim. David doesn't go himself. And there's no explanation given. Why isn't he going? Why isn't he fighting this war? This war was started because of his actions. Why is he not leading the troops in battle? And we have no information. It doesn't really tell us. But something that we do know is that when the Jewish people approached the Navi Shmuel to ask for a king in the first place, it was in order to fight wars, to lead them in battle. So why is David not going? We have no idea. And now our story starts in Pasuk Bet. Vayila et ha'erev, towards evening, Vayakam David me'al mishkavo vaytalach al gag beit hamelach. David gets up from his resting place and he's walking on the roof of his palace. Vayar isha rochetet me'al hagag, and he sees a woman bathing while he's on the roof. Vayisha tovat mar'eh ma'od, and she's very beautiful. Now, when it says that he gets up from his resting place towards evening, so that doesn't sound so good. Like those optics are not so good, because it means that he was taking a mid-afternoon nap. And again, we don't know why he was taking a mid-afternoon nap, the same way we don't know why he didn't go out to battle. But one could just imagine if front page news tomorrow, Bibi Netanyahu on the golf course, it just doesn't look right, right? Like our boys are fighting, they're risking their lives, people are dying, people are getting wounded, and the king is napping in the afternoon, and then he's taking a stroll on the roof of his palace because, you know, there's a nice breeze, and it just doesn't look right. And so you get the sense this whole story is starting on the wrong foot. And he sees this beautiful woman. So in Pasuk Gimel, Vayishlach David Vayidrosh La'isha, he sends messengers to find out who she is. Vayomer Halozot Bat Sheva Bat Eliam Eshet Uriah Chiti. So it's not like, oh my God, she's so beautiful, I must have her. And he goes and gets her. He knows exactly who she is. He sees a beautiful woman. He finds out what her name is. And then you don't have to flip. I will flip for you. Hold on. But if you flip to Divrei Hayamim Aleph, which is at the back of the Tanakh, there's his chronicles of mostly the life of David. And if you look at chapter 11, you get a whole list of David's warriors, right? Because there were many, many, many soldiers, but he had like, I think 30 like hand-picked, chosen warriors in his standing army. And in Parak Yud Al Pasuk Yud, Ela Roshei Giborim Asher David. These are the chief warriors, Hamidchazkim Imo B'Malchuto, that pretty much hold up his whole reign. And if you right, and then you get a whole list of who they are. And if you flip to the ends, oh, I thought oh, here, I did, okay. Pasuk Mem in this list is Uriah HaChiti. So Uriah is one of his main warriors. And elsewhere we find out that Bathsheba's grandfather from her other side is Achitophel, who was David's, one of his chief advisors. So this is not a nobody. This is a beautiful woman whose husband is on the battlefield fighting David's wars for him, one of his trusted advisors. So if you put it in this framework, David is not fighting with everyone when maybe he should be. One of his most trusted soldiers is out there and taking advantage of this situation is, oh, the husband's not home, right? And so he finds out who she is. He knows exactly who she is. And in Pasuk Daled, Vayishlach David malachim vayikacheha vatavo elav vayishkav ima. He sends messengers, he takes her, he sleeps with her, but don't worry, because the Pasuk tells us, V'hi mitkadeshet mitumata. It's okay, because she wasn't nida. She had become purified from her nida status. So don't worry, it's all okay. Vatashav el beita, and then she went home. Okay? And then the story's over, kind of. except Vatahar Aisha Vatishlach Vataged LeDavid Vatomer Hara Anochi. She goes back, she discovers she's pregnant a couple months later, and she sends a messenger to David saying, I'm pregnant. At which point he has a plan. Vayishlach David el Yoav. He sends to his army general, and he says, Shlach elai et Uriah Chiti, send me Uriah, the husband. Vayishlach Yoav et Uriah el David. And so Uriah comes back from the battlefield, and this is such a bizarre pasuk. Pasuk Zion. Vayavo Uriah elav vayishal David l'shlom Yoav. I don't know if he's not muted, but if everyone can mute, thank you. Uriah walks in and he asks about Shlom means peace. What's right? He asks about the peace of the war and the peace of Yoav and the peace of the nation.
No.
It does.
How are you?
It does. It's like a status
Right.
situation, right? It's a situation, what's going on? What's going on with the war? But the word itself is a little bizarre, right? They're at war, and what is Shlom HaMelchama? How's the war going? And how's Yoav? And how are the soldiers? Right? It's almost, that's the pretext. The pretext is, Uriah, I sent for you because I want to know what's doing. And then he said, he doesn't even wait for an answer. He says to him, Vayomer David Uriah, he says, go home and, clean up, right? Which is apparently a euphemism, right? Go be with your wife. And Uriah leaves the palace. The king sends gifts with him. He sends food with him. Ostensibly, you're going home. Here's food. You can sit with your wife and eat dinner. And in Pasuk Tev, Vayishkav Uriah Petach Beit HaMelech It's Kol Avdei Adonav. He sleeps at the opening to the palace outside in the courtyard. V'lo yarad el beito. Uriah doesn't go home. So the plan was, bring Uriah back from battle, send him home, he'll be with his wife, then he'll go back to war, and then when she has a baby, everyone will assume, oh wow, it's a preemie, right? But that Uriah is the father, except that Uriah is not playing along, and he doesn't go back home. And so David hears about this. He hears Uriah didn't go home. David el Uriah. So he says to Uriah the next day, I'm sorry, you've been away for a very long time. You didn't want to go home and say hi to your wife? Vayomer Uriah el David. So this is, question here is, how much does Uriah know? Does he know anything? Is he getting a sense? There was a lot of back and forth, right? David sends messengers to find out about Bathsheba. Then he sends messengers to bring Bathsheba. Then she goes home. Then she sends messengers, I'm pregnant. Then he sends message. A lot of back and forth. And is there gossip? Right? It's not like he sent one messenger to go get her, right? There was, who is she? And why does he want to know? Does Uriah get this? Are people talking about him, right? As he's walking around, or are there whispers? Or does he really not have a clue? So the question is, when Uriah responds to the king, is this a rebuke? Is he really innocently speaking here? You can read it either way. So when David says to Uriah, why didn't you go home? This is what Uriah responds. He says in Pasuk Yud, I'm sorry, Yud Aleph, Vayomer Uriah el David, Ha'aron v'Yisrael v'Yehuda yoshvim b'Sukkot. The Aron, the people, are out there in the fields. Adoni Yoav, Adoni al pnei hasadeh chonim. Right? Yoav, the army general, and the soldiers of Yoav are literally camped out on the battlefields. I should go home and eat and drink and be with my wife. I swear, I would never do such a thing. Now the question is he really just innocently, maybe, even if he's rebuking, what's the rebuke here? Is it really, David, come on, you should be out there. And you called me back, but I'm not gonna, party and relax if everyone's out there. That's one level. But level number two maybe is, I should go home and eat and drink and sleep with my wife the way you did. How much does he know? We don't know. Meantime, David says to him, okay, you know what? Why don't we do this? Why don't you stay another day or two? And then I'll send you home. I'll send you back. So he stays another 2 days. and still does not go home. So David calls him in. Yes.
Hear from Bathsheba, does she know he's here?
And that's the question. We have no idea. We don't know anything about Bathsheba. We don't know if Bathsheba knows he's there. Why doesn't she come and meet with him and maybe try to get him to come back home? We don't know anything about her, what she thought, how she felt, anything. So hold on one second. So now David's really in trouble. It's been 3 days. He's not going back. So David calls him for a feast. I'm going to send you back, but first let's have a meal. And they eat and they drink, and David gets him drunk. And then drunk, he leaves the palace and still doesn't go back to his wife. So now David has plan B. David sefer el Yoav, vayishlach be'ad Uriah. David writes out instructions for the army general and sends it back with Uriah. And the instructions are as follows. Havu el Uriah mul pnei hamilchama chazaka. Put Uriah at the fiercest battle place, right? Where the fighting is the worst, and make sure he dies. And imagine, just to make like insult to injury, Uriah is literally carrying his own death warrant in his hand to Yoav. Yoav gets the instructions. He puts Uriah where the fighting is fiercest. In Pasuk Yudzayin, vayitzu anshe ha'ir vayilachamu al Yoav. And remember, there's a siege. The people from Ammon come out of the siege. Vayipol min ha'am me'avdei David, and soldiers of David die. Vayamat gam Uriah Hitti, and Uriah is killed. Vayishlach Yoav vayaged David, and so Yoav sends a messenger to David, saying, taken care of, no worries, right? And then at the end, Pasuk Kaf Daled, Vayamutu me'anshe hamelech gam avdecha Uriah Hitti met. Uriah is dead. And David's response is, right, the message was, many people died, but don't worry, also Uriah. And David's response was, tell Yoav not to feel bad. People die in war. That's what happens. Okay. Pasuk Kavav, Vatishma eshet Uriah, ki met Uriah, Isha vatispara ba'ala, Bathsheba hears Uriah dies. She mourns for him. And then, Vayavor ha'evel, when the mourning period had passed, Vayishlach David vayasfa el beito, David sends for her, brings her into the palace, Vatihilo leisha, he marries her, Vatela lo ben, and a son is born, and everything's great, except Vayirah hadavar asher asa David b'nei Hashem. Right, in the eyes of God, this was very, very bad. And what happens in the next chapter is Hashem sends a Navi to David and gives him a whole mashal about a man with a sheep, who's right, and a rich man with many sheep who steals the poor man's sheep. And David gets very angry and he says, how could he do that? This rich man steal the poor man's sheep? That's all he had. He deserves death. And Natan says, you are that rich man, right? You are, it was just a mashal. You are the man who committed this sin. And therefore, terrible things will happen to you. And David then says the famous words, Chatati laHashem. I sinned to God. At which point the Navi says, okay, because you said I chatati, you won't die, right? But the child will die. And the Navi leaves. And so we're left with many, many questions. I think this is one of the most troubling stories in all of Tanakh, right? So biggest problem is, what is the punishment for adultery and murder separately? Death, right? You commit adultery, you're put to death. You commit murder, you're put to death. And if you committed murder, even in the days of the Sanhedrin, if I committed murder and I was brought to trial and I said to the judges, Chatati laHashem, oh my, I did it. They would not say, you did tshuva. Okay. So what is going on? And I think that's the biggest problem. But a secondary problem is, does anyone remember what Shaul HaMelech was the first king? David's the second king of all of Israel. Shaul was chosen because he was an exceptional human being, exceptional character traits. He really was a very righteous person. Anyone remember why he lost the kingship?
Because he had Rahman
That's the second time. That's when they said it's done. Can't even fix it.
He went
Oh no, that was the end.
That was it.
David went to fight a war against the Plishtim. Shmuel tells him months and months earlier, Shmuel told him, in the future, you will find yourself at battle with the Plishtim. Before you go to war, once you've gathered your army, wait for me for 7 days. Don't attack. Wait for me for a week. After that 7-day period, I will come. I'll give korbanot, and then you can go to war. So there's a months and months later, there's a war with the Plishtim, and Shaul gathers his army. And they're waiting. And every day that they wait, more and more soldiers leave. And so he's left with, we find out at the end, I think 3,000 soldiers at the end. Meantime, the Plishtim are there. Their army is described as kachol asher al sfat hayam, like the grains of sand on the seashore. They are so numerous. And every day that David waits, that Shaul waits, more soldiers are leaving, and he waits. He waits 7 days. And then towards the end of the 7th day, he starts to panic. And he says, I waited 7 days. Shmuel should be here any minute, but he's not here. And so we need to fight this war. But how can we go to war without Hashem's help? So I'm just going to bring the korban. And he brings the korban. And then, of course, like in the movies, Shmuel comes right at the end and says, you didn't wait the full 7 days? That's it. And I'm thinking there's so many reasons why what he did was so bad and why maybe he should have lost the kingship. But he waited almost 7 full days while he lost all of his soldiers. And for that, and then he still brought a korban and he lost the kingship. David commits adultery and murder, but he gets to keep the kingship. Right? I mean, that's a little, it's very troubling. And so the traditional answer that's given is, why did he get to keep the kingship? Why did he, why did he get forgiven? Because he said chatati. So I think that the message there, if you want to go with the story straight as it is, the message is a very powerful message about tshuva. Because me personally, in a court with the Sanhedrin, if I say, I admit I did the wrong thing, that doesn't get me off the hook. But the reason you punish someone is either to make sure they learn their lesson, or to, I guess, kind of like a midah keneged midah. You did something, you need a punishment. We're talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're not talking about a court. We're not talking about a human court. So God himself can look at David inside his heart and mind and say, there's no need for the death penalty. There's no need to take your kingship away from you, because I do see what your thought process is. I see your feelings. I see this is true tshuva. And the reason that I think that this is such a powerful message is because if you look at what Shaul did, it's not necessarily about what he did. It's about the fact that when he was called on it, when the Navi said, what did you do? He starts making excuses. Well, I had to. The army was leaving. We were going to be attacked. And then the second time, like Marilyn mentioned, the second time round, they were fighting Amalek and he was supposed to kill everybody. And instead he left the king alive. And again, you could say the same thing. He killed 99.9% of the people he was supposed to kill. He left one person alive. And instead of saying, right, I did the wrong thing, you're right. Shaul says, no, the people, right? The people wanted to save the sheep. He's blaming everybody, but not taking responsibility for himself. And I think the powerful message here is not just one of tshuva, of, whatever excuses you have at the end of the day, take ownership of your actions. I think the message is also, we're talking about a king. And a king has a dynasty, meaning there are traits that are going to be passed down from generation to generation. We need a ruler. We don't need a ruler who's perfect, because there's no such thing. And even if we get a king who's perfect, his son's not going to be perfect, and his grandson's not going to be perfect, and everyone's going to mess up at some point. So it's not about what you do, it's about your reaction to it. And if Shaul cannot admit twice that he did the wrong thing, and he blames everybody but himself, then that's not somebody that we could have as our king. But if we have somebody who can say, I sinned, Even though the kings in the Middle East, in the ancient Near East, they all do this. But he just says straight off the bat, you're right, that's me, I sinned. Then we have a leader who recognizes God's authority and can own up to what he did and take ownership and responsibility. That's a very important thing. So I think if you want to read the story that way, this is a very powerful story. I will say that it's not a satisfying kind of answer. I think you still say, but this doesn't make any sense. I mean, he literally had someone killed, he committed adultery, like that's not okay. Even if he said, I'm sorry. And so I want to take a look at the Gemara, which I think will help make it worse and better all at the same time. So, I should have read source number 1 first. Okay. And this is really just kind of to make it worse. The Malbim reads that first statement and wants to know why we need that first pasuk, right? It was the turn of the year when the kings go out to fight. And then we have this story. What's the connection? So the Malbim says, and I'll read it in English. It was the turn of the year, hints to the fact that since the king was dwelling in his palace and didn't go himself out to fight the wars of Hashem, the sin came to him because of this, right? You think it's all about Bathsheba. It's not even only about Bathsheba. It's about the fact there's something bigger going on, if you can even imagine. It's about the fact that he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's not where he's supposed to be. He's not fulfilling the duties of the king. And in order that one not say that he was tired and weak from the previous war, it says it was the turn of the year. He was rested. They had taken a pause. He wasn't exhausted. He was well rested. In order to say that you not say it was too cold and rainy, not fitting to go out and fight, it says at the time that should say kings, my apologies, that the kings went out. No, this was the time to fight. It was Sivan. All the kings went out to battle in order that one not say it was a small war, unworthy of the honor of the kings to go out himself. It says he sent Yoav, his army general, and his servants. So basically, the Malbim is saying there's no way to let David off the hook here. And it's not only about the adultery and the murder. It's about him not doing what he's supposed to do, not acting the way a king should act. And before we get to the second reading, I want to point something else out also. There's a literary technique that's called in Hebrew milah mancha. I'm trying to think, I think it was Martin Buber who was the first one to make use of this, called it a light word. That is German. I'm not pronouncing it. It's not a light word, it's Leitwort. I don't know how to pronounce that in German properly, but it means a word that repeats over and over again in a story and may be the key to the story. If you look at the story, just the section, and Martin Buber is the one to point this out, and he says, any word that's repeated too frequently to be normative could be considered a milah mancha, but 7 is a key number. If there's a word that repeats 7 times, that usually indicates that this is significant. If you look at just the story itself, where he sins, from pasuk bet to tetvav, right, verses 2 to 15, the word vayishlach is written in some form 7 times. Vayishlach means to send. Okay, so starting with pasuk gimel, vayishlach David. David sends messengers to find out who this girl is. And then he sends messengers in pasuk Dalet to go get her. And then she sends to him in verse 6 to say, I'm pregnant. And then he sends messengers to Yoav to go get and send Uriah to me. And then towards the end, he says to Uriah, stay here for 2 more days, and then I will send you away back to battle. And then he sends the orders with Uriah to Yoav. What's going on, possibly, and this is a Yael Ziegler idea, is that it's not just that David is not where he's supposed to be. It's not just that he's not leading the troops the way he's supposed to be leading them. It's not just that he committed adultery and committed murder. It's that he's misusing his power. He's not where he's supposed to be as king, and he's sitting there sending everybody here and there and everywhere. I don't remember when this was, years ago. There was this scandal where the mayor of, I don't remember if it was New York or New Jersey, was using the government helicopter to go take vacations, right? There's this sense that when you are in charge, right, when you're a leader, then there are certain things, things that you need. You need a chauffeur potentially because you need to go to meetings. And But if you're going to start using them for your own purposes, then that's a problem. The fact that he's sending people here and there and there, go get the girl, go find out who she is, go send, right, I'm going to use the army and the war to get this guy killed for myself, that's also problematic. But now let's take a look at the Gemara itself. So that's source number 2. It's in Masachet Shabbat, 56a. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rav Yonatan. Kol ha'omer David chata eina ela to'eh. Anyone who says that David sinned is mistaken. Why? Why would we say that? Shene Amar, because later on in chapter 18, it says, Vayhi David l'chol drachav maskil, v'Hashem imo. David was successful in all his ways and God was with him. Efshar chata chet ba liyado u'shchina imo. Could it be that he sinned in such an egregious way, but it says God was with him? That can't be, right? And what do we know, by the way, about Shaul? Once he sins and loses the kingship, he's got this ruach ra'ah. And how did we discussed what's the ruach ra'ah? That God was with him and God left, and it left that vacuum that caused this depression. How could it be? David does this terrible thing and God is with him. Ela mani mekayem madua bazita et dvar Hashem la'asot ra'ah. Okay, so if I'm going to say David didn't sin because God is still with him, how do I understand the actual text that says, the Navi says to him, why did you do this terrible thing? And you, right, why did you do this terrible thing? Bikesh la'asot v'lo asa. Okay, so maybe David's intentions were to commit adultery, but he didn't actually do it.
What do you do with baby?
Right? So then the question is, before you even turn the page, right, what are our problems with this approach? So number 1 is the Navi says you sinned. Number 2, David himself says I sinned. It says he did bad in the eyes of God. Not only that, what's the kind of proof that maybe he did commit adultery? She's pregnant. It says he slept with her. It says she's the wife of Uriah. In fact, and this is actually, I think, a very strong point, she's called Eshet Uriah throughout the entire story. Bathsheba is called Uriah's wife every time she's mentioned. They don't usually do that. Usually you find out who someone is in the beginning, and then that's it. You know who they are. I have to keep reminding you. No, right? Bathsheba, maybe not every time, maybe not in the beginning, but right at the end, Bathsheba, Uriah's wife, hears that Uriah, her husband, has died, and she mourns for her husband. She's a married woman. He slept with her. That's adultery. How do we get around that? Okay. Anyone remember this from grammar school? How do we get around the facts? Okay, Judy remembers. Okay. They gave a provisional get. Okay, here we go. I'm trying to remember, where did I, okay, take a look at source number 3. And and the baby is a mamzer. The baby is a bastard child, if indeed it was adultery. But we're trying to say it wasn't adultery. How is it possibly not adultery? So take a look at number 3, right, which is on the second side. So now you can all look at the second side. And he's quoting from the Gemara. Rashi says as follows. What's the idea here? She's pregnant. Let's kill the husband. How is that going to help anything? Right? So Rashi explains, no, it really is helpful. Because if Uriah dies, then Bathsheba becomes retroactively divorced. And then it seems that he would not have committed adultery. And this is again from the Gemara. Kol hayotze lemelchama kotev get liishto al tnai. It seems that, according to the Gemara, it does not say this in the text, that during David's time, he came up with this idea. Right, today when we use the term aguna, usually it refers, unfortunately, to a woman whose husband refuses to give her a get. But the traditional aguna means chained. The traditional aguna, the case that is spoken about in the Gemara, is a woman whose husband is lost. We don't know what happened to him, right? I think the traditional case is he goes on a voyage and he's on a ship and he never comes back. So did he drown? Is he dead? Did he disappear? Nobody knows. And if you don't know with certainty that the husband is dead, the woman can't remarry. And so, unfortunately, right, this happens in war also, right? How many times do you open up the Times of Israel and it's discovered that they identified, right, another body, or there's evidence? They didn't have DNA back then. So if someone dies in battle and is not brought home, for whatever reason, animals carry off the body, the enemy carries, whatever it is, then that woman can never remarry. So David's court came up with this great idea that they write a conditional divorce, that if the husband doesn't come back, if he's killed in battle, and again, I don't know the details of the divorce document, but if he doesn't come back, then this woman is divorced,
And free to do
free from the time he left, not from the time that they hear word that he didn't come back. So if Uriah is killed in battle, then that retroactively makes her a divorced woman when David slept with her. So even though technically in real time he slept with a married woman, now that Uriah is dead, it makes her divorced retroactively. Okay, that's point one. Okay. What about, so that takes care of, for a moment, that takes care of her adultery. What takes care of the murder, right? I mean, he literally sends instructions to have a specific person put in a specific place in the battle so that he will die. That is murder by proxy. What do we do with that? So if you take a look at source number 4, so the Gemara in Shabbos says as follows: Oto haragta b'cherev b'nei Ammon. The accusation is you killed Uriah using Ammon, the enemy, as a weapon. Macharev b'nei Ammon iyatane enashalav. Right? Af Uriah Hachiti, I'm sorry, iyatane enashalav. What is the reason? Oh, so my Tama, sorry, what's the reason? To the same, I'm trying to, what, the same way, the same way that it was Ammon who killed him, so too, you are not punishable for his death. Why? My Tama, why is he not punishable by death, David? More b'malchotava, because he was a traitor to the throne. In what way was he a traitor to the throne? What did he do that made him a traitor? When David says to him, why are you not going home? What is his response? In Shmuel Bet, Parak Yudalef, Pasuk Yudalef, Adoni Yoav, V'Avdei Adoni al Pnei Hasadeh Chonim. What did he say to the king's face? He says to the king's face, you want me to go home? But my master Yoav and my master's soldiers are out there on the battlefield. He calls Yoav my master, standing in front of the king, to the king's face. He says, I don't have to listen to you because my boss is out there in the battlefield. And that's treason.
It's very weak.
Hold on, Amarav.
I mean, come on.
Right, hold on. When you analyze the matter of David, no sin that he committed is found in his lifetime except for that involving Uriah, as it is written, because David did that. Okay. So then what's the issue then, right? Why is he accused of this? So take a look at the Malbim first. Oh, I'm sorry. The Malbim has something else. The Malbim says it's not, right, what is the treason here? It's not that he calls Yoav my boss in front of the king. It's that the king gave direct orders and he disobeyed those orders. And not only did he disobey those orders, he did them very publicly. Right? Uriah was told to go back home, and instead he slept in the courtyard with all the other servants who were out there. So everybody saw him very publicly. And the Malbim says, it was an embarrassment, right? It was, embarrassment is not even the right word. It was like a mockery, humiliation in front of all the servants of the king. They all knew it. So he is defying the king in public. He's making a statement in front of everybody. And that is, I don't know if that's stronger or weaker, but that is the Malbim's approach.
Of course, he would have had to make the statement.
Well, yes, okay. So here's the thing. According to the Gemara, David didn't sin. And we could retroactively get him out of adultery. we could get, and by the way, right, in terms of the murder aspect of it, we know that even though the halachic system, there's a halachic system at work, and everyone who has ever seen, studied Gemara and Mishnah, there's the court and you need two witnesses. There was a parallel system because that system was not practical. If you think about it for a second, in order to be convicted of murder, you have to be warned in front of two witnesses not to commit the murder. If you're not warned, then you can't be punished. Well, who's telling anybody before they do it? Okay. And then there have to be two witnesses to the act, and those witnesses need to be kosher witnesses, right? So if someone were to come in here into this room, right? If my husband came in right now and shot me in front of everybody, well, he would get off scot-free because none of you are kosher witnesses because you're all women. So there has to be a parallel system because the halachic system is not practical in the sense that it doesn't really cover all the bases. And one of the parallel systems is the law of the king. The king could decree death upon somebody who's deserving of it. So if somebody defies the king and commits treason, the king could commit that person to death. So there you go. He didn't do anything wrong. So, okay, so now where do we take, what's the problem with all this?
Why would he say
Come on, he says I sinned. If he didn't do anything wrong, he says I sinned. God says he sinned. He's punished. He's punished in horrible ways. So really, what is the Gemara trying to say? Because it doesn't make any sense. And I think that they're smarter than definitely me. And I sense that there's something off here. So I would imagine that whoever wrote, the Amoraim and the Gemara know more than I do. How could they say this? Nancy, what are we thinking?
On this particular point you're
Okay.
raising right now, I'm saying that they know that they have to somehow find a way to make to koshify.
They're
David
kosherifying David HaMelech.
HaMelech,
Why?
Because he
Why?
was David HaMelech and the father of Shlomo HaMelech. And the father of
Okay, I actually want to address what you said, that he is David HaMelech, the father of Shlomo HaMelech. Can I just use that for a second to make this even
Yes.
worse? Let's make this
Yes.
even worse, right? Who becomes the next king is David's son that he has with Bathsheba,
Yes.
right? So this whole thing is just so bizarre. So I think on the one hand, what the Gemara is doing is looking at the story as it's written and saying what we said, which is, that's a beautiful message about tshuva. It's gorgeous. It really is. It's so lovely, right? He really committed. He did tshuva. He said one word, right? But God could see into your heart and into your mind and knows that it's sincere. What a beautiful thing, right? Except that there's something off about that. It really is. It cannot be that David HaMelech, the father of all future kings, committed adultery and murder, and we're just going to let him get away with it. And not only that, be the head of this dynasty forever and ever. That doesn't make as much tshuva as you did. Beautiful. You did tshuva, so you don't get the death penalty. But that's it. So they're looking for a way to koshify. But I think they're doing something else also. In a way, what they're making what he did, they're making a stronger statement. What they're saying is like this. Technically, David didn't sin. Technically, he didn't commit murder. And technically, he didn't commit adultery either. And so he could have gotten off the hook. And when the Navi comes and says, you are that man, right? The rich man stole the poor man's sheep. And David says, that man deserves death. And the Navi says, well, you are that man. He could have said, wait, hold up 1 second. It's not exactly the same. I didn't really technically commit adultery. I mean, Uriah's dead, right? So she was divorced. And the Navi would have been like, well, you killed him. And David could have said, well, hold on 1 second. He committed treason in front of everybody, right? But he didn't. He said, technically, I didn't sin, but I'm held to a higher standard. And so what the Navi is saying is, you can get off on a technicality, but you still sinned. We cannot let you get away with that. And instead of saying, yeah, on the technicality, I did nothing wrong, he said, you're right. He said, I could show you exactly why I shouldn't be punished. And yet, chatati, I did. You're right. You're 100% right. I can't get away with this. I am morally 1,000% wrong. And I think that's why he doesn't get the death penalty, because technically he doesn't deserve it. And I think he could stay as king and as the head of this dynasty because he's not making excuses. He's not trying to get out of it. He's saying, you're right. You're right 1,000%. Even though technically I didn't do anything wrong, I am guilty 100%. And that's who we need as king. And point number 3 is that he did not get off scot-free. And I want to ask you which punishment you would prefer. Okay. But before we get there, yeah, Judy, question.
So, I hear what you're saying, but the
Okay.
Gemara doesn't say that.
The
Nowhere
Gemara says
doesn't say.
anyone who says that David sinned is mistaken.
but they don't
And
go
then
to the
they
next-
go through a whole thing about
Yes.
how he
So
technically
technically-
didn't, right.
so
They
technically
didn't
but
make,
they don't then go to the next step and say, but he's held exactly what you just said. The Gemara leaves it at,
the Gemara
at the
leaves it at
technical.
technically he didn't sin. First of
So
all, I
what
just
kind
want
of
to point
lesson-
out that this is a conversation between 2 Amoraim and the other one says, yes, he did. So this is one statement that says he didn't sin. The other statement said he did. But I think the Gemara doesn't need to.
why not?
I think the Gemara doesn't need to because I think it's fairly obvious. I think that the obvious way to read this is he didn't technically sin. He didn't do this. He didn't do that. Now let's go back to the story. He said hatati.
They don't do that.
No, because I don't think, I feel like they don't need to because you on your own could go back to the story and see it says hatati.
Okay.
Okay, I hear what you're saying,
Except
Judy
that
says
having
it
this conversation
should,
Like right-wing people.
right, in that it would have been
that will- what do you
easier.
mean, will take it only to the Gemara.
It would have been clearer had the Gemara made the statement that we're saying and ended the conversation by saying something like, okay, maybe he didn't sin technically, but he still sinned morally. I agree. It would have been much clearer and then there would have been no ambiguity. And maybe this is the way I'm reading it or I'm explaining it and maybe he really, really meant it. It's very possible. I'm sorry.
I think like, let's say with Shaul HaMelech, I think he would have like, if he liked the girl, he would have taken into her.
Shaul,
No, I'm saying if it was like a different king, a
if it was a
powerful
different
king,
king,
there's a
oh,
girl that
yeah.
he liked.
oh,
He would have
100%.
killed the husband. He would have
In
taken the
any
girl
other
into the
society,
house.
this would have happened. No
the
one would have
bee-
said boo.
He
Yeah.
The girl went back to her house. He could take her to her house. He tried to make peace with Oliah. He tried to bring him to his home. He tried to give him drinks to make maybe peace.
He
with
tried to
him.
cover it up.
Go
I don't
back
think he
to
tried to
your
make
wife.
peace. I think he tried to cover it up. But what you're saying is any other
He
king
wasn't
wouldn't have
like-
even tried to fix it. And the
Yeah.
fact that he tried to fix it is to his credit. And I would argue back that Jewish kings are held to a different standard. It doesn't matter if other kings in the area would, you're right. You're right in the sense
Maybe
that
he
at
wanted
least
to
on
send him-
some level,
I think he wanted to really send him to his house. Maybe he knows him. He felt bad. He wanted to send him back to his wife.
I think he wanted to cover it up. And I think maybe if you want to be really, really generous, no, if you want to be really, really generous, maybe he felt bad and he said, I don't want to mess up their marriage. And therefore, for her sake, we're going to cover it up. And that way no one will know, maybe, maybe. But I think that you're right in the sense that I think on a moral level, what he did was much better than maybe some of the other kings in the area would do. But I think we're held to a different standard. And I think that makes what he said when he said chatati even stronger. Because he didn't say that. He didn't say, oh, come on. You know, if I was the king of whatever, I wouldn't have even tried.
What do we know about Bathsheba?
Nothing. We know
That's it.
nothing about
No, one
Bathsheba.
thing, except you know
We
her
know that-
lineage.
We know her
So he's
lineage.
faithful.
We know,
It seems to me, you know, one other thing, that when it came down to who's going to change the future of the Jewish people, who did David HaMelech listen to?
right, at the end of his life,
listened
she
to-
does come to
it was
him
the
and
only
say
That could change his
that my son
mind
Shlomo is supposed to
was
be king.
Bathsheba.
and he listened to her, right? That's true.
But then what do you do with the fact that he was punished?
So that's okay.
His
So
Absalom
let's take a
died.
look. Yeah,
That's
let's
the
take a look
punishment.
at the punishment, and you tell me
Why
which
would you punish
punishment,
someone who wasn't
which
guilty?
punishment would
Because-
you
and if he
prefer?
wasn't guilty,
Okay.
then why did he say I'm guilty?
Okay, so take a
If it
look.
wasn't
Hold on
really
one
guilty,
second.
why is he saying I'm guilty?
You know, you can feel you can feel guilty at some levels, and not be guilty legally. We can see that in the look at what's going on around us.
Approach that we have
you know?
saints that our leaders could never sin, and it goes against the grain.
You know what? I have to tell you something, right? It almost seems like the Gemara is taking that, oh, our ancestors can never do anything wrong. I think that there needs to be a balance, and I've learned that as a teacher. I guess I learned that approach, right? Our avos, they never did anything wrong. And then as I got older and I learned a
Well,
more
what are you talking
nuanced
about?
approach, to me, it seems like the fact that they could sin and the way they handle sin is an
Well,
even
they're human.
deeper meaning and message. And so that's how I decided I'm going to teach this in high school. And so I remember I was teaching the stories of Eliyahu. And at the end of the year, the girls are like, this is who comes to our Seder? Oh, we really don't like him. This is who we do. And I realized my mistake. And I think my mistake is you need a balance. And I think at a certain age, nuance is a little bit too challenging. And therefore, the basis that you have to start with is we're not talking about bad people. We're not even talking about neutral people. We really are talking about righteous people. And if you open up, and if there's time, I do want to open up to the parak of Tehillim that David wrote after this sin. If you look at Tehillim, at David's thought process, this is not a normal person. This is really a righteous person. And you need to start with that basis and then go on and get nuanced. So that was my mistake as a teacher, and I hope I have corrected since. But I think maybe that's one of the reasons that there are places in the Gemara when you have a discussion like this and there are two opinions and one says David sins and the other one says, what are you talking about? No way. I think it's that conversation is trying to help us achieve that balance of don't forget who we're talking about. Don't forget the kind of person. Don't throw everything out. He really was a very righteous person. And Judy, I think that the danger there is that you don't get the nuance. But
No,
I do
you're
think,
misunderstanding me.
I think that approach is he could never have sinned because he was such a righteous person.
I think the beauty is saying that righteous people sin and they can do teshuva, and we can aspire to that.
100%.
We can't aspire to being saints. None of us are going to be.
I agree with you.
But
But that's a very nuanced, that's what I'm saying. That's a very nuanced approach that he's even greater for the fact that he sinned. So if you whitewash it, you lose that greatness. And that's where I think they're trying to balance. But I think that that's the danger. The danger is then you take that statement at face value and you lose all that nuance and you actually end up with David not being as great as he could. But I think that this story in particular, I think the danger the other way is you learn it's so nuanced and you end up saying, okay, so that's nice, so he said he did tshuva, that's beautiful, but come on, at the end of the day, he committed adultery. So I think maybe what the Gemara is trying to do is help us with the balance. But I do, hold on one second, Nancy, I do want to just address his punishment for a second, because the way we all learn it is he said chatati, and Hashem said, oh, beautiful, you're forgiven, but that's not what happened. If you take a look at chapter 12, Parak Yud Bet, Pasuk Zion, this is the original punishment. Before David says chatati, the Navi says, you are that man, right? I made you king. I gave you everything. And because you did this, and in Pasuk Tet, by the way, he accuses him. Interestingly, you tell me what the main focus of the sin is according to the Navi. Madua bazita etvar Hashem lasot hara be'einav, right? Why have you done this to God? Et Uriah hachiti hikita b'cherev. You have killed Uriah by sword, and taken his wife as your wife, while you have killed him with the sword of Ammon. What's not even mentioned, which is interesting. He doesn't mention the adultery. He doesn't. He said you killed Uriah and took his wife, which is fascinating. But it says, now the sword will not leave your household. Ad olam, forever. because of what you did. There's going to be evil in your household. This is midah keneged midah, measure for measure. I will take your wives. I'm going to take your wives away from you. They will be taken from you and given to someone else who will sleep with your wives in front of everybody. And right, you did it in secret, I'm going to do it in public. So the sword is going to ravage your family, and we know that his sons rebelled against him. There was war. 4 of his sons died. His wives were taken during one of the rebellions by his son. And look, that's when he says, Vayomer David al Natan chatati laHashem. He says, I sinned. And Natan says, okay, Gam Hashem ha'avir chatatcha, God will forgive your sin. Lo tamut. You won't die. And then he says, but this baby will die. And he leaves, which means that his tshuva means that he won't get the death penalty, and that this child from this union cannot survive for many, many reasons. But the punishment that's not revoked is death in his household, and what will happen to his wives. And if you think about Shaul's punishment is he lost the kingship, right? And his sons died, but they died with him. He did not have to live through the death of his children. His sons died going into battle with him by his side. They were loyal till the end. David has sons who rebel against him. So if someone were to ask me if I would prefer to lose the kingship or have multiple deaths of children in rebellion, I would choose Shaul's punishment.
Maybe Hashem should have given it a third try and taken the kingship
I moved on. So I think that the message is there's so many things to learn, and that's why I agree with Judy. I like to learn it in a more nuanced way.
And isn't it pleasant that everybody else dies except for him? I mean,
It is
that's
not
actually a really terrible
everybody,
thing.
right? The fact that
It's a
everyone
terrible
dies
thing that
and
he's
he
gonna-
has to see it, and
Right.
it's
but
terrible.
They're
Yes, it's a
getting the
terrible punishment.
also, and they're being punished because of his sin.
They're being punished because of
They're
his
dying
sin.
because-
Well, they're also being punished for their own actions. It's not like his sons are killed for no reason,
Well, the
except for this
the
baby. And this baby, and that's, by the way, I think an even worse punishment. The baby gets sick for 7 days before he dies, and David he fasts, he cries, and to know that your child is dying because of you, I think is maybe the worst punishment. So
factor in Tamar, the rape of Tamar.
so the question then becomes, who are the children that die because of his sin? It seems in the mashal, right? The mashal is a rich man kills the poor man's sheep, and therefore the halacha, if you know the halacha from Shmot, in Mishpatim, if you steal someone's sheep, and if you steal something from somebody, you have to pay back double. So if I steal your sheep, I have to give you back 2. But if I steal your sheep and I kill it, then I have to pay you back 4. And so 4 of his children die, and then there's a whole question as to who are the 4. And is Tamar considered, Tamar's the daughter that was raped, is that considered one of the 4 that was a punishment or not, is a question. And that opens up a whole other question as to whether Tamar was actually his daughter or not. So that's a discussion for a totally different time. But I think that he says, I sinned, and God says you sinned, whether it's with actual adultery or murder, that's the pshat, or the way we're looking at it, where he sins morally in so many ways. He abuses his power. He morally, right, takes someone else's wife, and everything from beginning to end, from not going into battle, from staying home, everything from beginning to end morally was wrong. And he admits it, he's called on it, he admits it, and he's punished for it terribly, but not by losing the kingship. Because the fact that he was able to take ownership means that this is something that we need our kings to, this attribute is something that we need our kings to have. Because our kings are going to mess up. It is human nature. We are not going to have anybody who's going to have perfect children all the way through. And even if David didn't do anything wrong, and Shlomo didn't do anything wrong, at some point down the road, you're going to have someone who's not the best king who's going to sin. And does he have that attribute of being able to say, it doesn't matter if technically I didn't sin. In the eyes of God, I did. Or is it going to be someone who makes excuses? And so he keeps the kingship. He doesn't get the death penalty because of his tshuva and because technically maybe he didn't sin, but he is punished terribly. He's not let off the hook. He doesn't get off scot-free. And I think that that's a very powerful message for us as well, in the sense that it's not just about the technical sins. It's not about checking off the boxes. Elul is coming. It's not all about, did I, give my maaser, and did I, I don't know, am I not speaking Lashon Hara? It's about so many other things. And it's about the way we act morally, not just the way that we act technically. Oh yes, I did say, if you take a look, and this is also fascinating, Tehillim chapter 51, Nun Aleph. Just kidding. Yeah. Lamanatech mizmor leDavid bevo elav Natan hanavi. Right. This is a psalm for David when Natan the Navi comes to him achrei Baal Batsheva, after he sins with Batsheva, and it's all about God. It's all about Hashem. Right? He says, Hashem, I'm sorry what I did to you. Please don't leave me. And it's not a word about I did something to someone else. Right. And I think, what do you think about that then? What do you think is the message here? Where the whole thing, after he sins with Batsheva, and he literally says the words in Pasuk Vav, Lacha levadcha chatati. To you, God alone, I have sinned. How does that fit in with the way that I was trying to present the story?
Well, I would say that it means that, which I have been trying to say, like, is that I know that David HaMelech lived in a different plane of reality and knowledge.
But I don't want to look at it that he lived on a different plane, because then I can't learn anything from that, because I don't live on a different plane. I'm a very flesh and blood human being.
Well, I think that David HaMelech, because he was selected to be king from nothing, the evidence of his specialness and his significance to the community started at a young age in miraculous ways all the time, and they never stopped. He was different
Okay,
from most
it
people.
could be, honestly, we could look at it that way. He was just different than other people.
Different level.
Another way to look at it, I think, is, which would fit in with the way I've been trying to, kind of trying to address this, is he's basically saying, even if, right, what is my sin here? My sin is a moral sin, right? My sin is a moral sin. And why is that a problem? Why is it a problem that I sinned morally? If I didn't technically do anything wrong, is because of Hashem.
Well,
It's
maybe
because I am held to this standard. And when he says, I sinned to you, he's basically saying, yes, technically I didn't sin to anyone else, but I did sin to you. I sin to you. And what I love here, and hopefully this is something that, if you don't remember anything else, hopefully you will take this with you. And I know a lot of you know this already, is if you look at Pasuk Yud Zayin in this Mizmor, after he says, Hashem, I sin to you, please don't hide from me. I have a broken heart because of what I did. In Pasuk Yud Zayin, he says, Hashem sfatai tiftachu fi agiti latecha. Right? God, open up my lips so I can praise you. I don't even feel worthy of praise anymore. And that is the pasuk that Chazal chose for us to start our Shemona Esrei, that when we pray, when we daven, we should be of the mindset of, I'm standing before God, and everything that I do and everything that I'm standing as, number one, a sinner, as someone who's not doing everything 100% correctly, and as one who recognizes that ultimately the reason that the things that I do that are not okay, ultimately the reason they're not okay is because God said so. And so, ultimately, I'm asking Hashem that maybe I'm not worthy of it. Please allow me to stand before you and pray. So that is the story of David and Batsheva. And again, what I love about looking at it in different ways is whatever speaks to you. There are people who really like to learn the story. And he was a tzaddik from beginning to end, and he didn't do anything wrong. And we'll prove it. But I like to look at it as what makes him even greater is he was very human and very flawed, and yet was able to rise above it. And what bothers him maybe most about this whole thing is it might get in the way with his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's a tremendous thing. So I just want to add that next week, I unfortunately have teachers' meetings on Tuesday, so I'm going to hopefully have the class on Monday, and I hope that most of you who would like to come can join anyway, and same time, 10 o'clock on Monday. And thank you everyone on Zoom who have joined us. Okay, thank you. And now if anyone has any, let me just.
We're really trying to make this, maybe he was